Peace, peace, peace. This is A Marvelous back again. A Mar, aka Marvelous. Thank you for tuning in. Good evening, good day, good night, all that good stuff. So we're gonna get right into it. This is part two to what we did earlier in regards to covering the course of retail crime. And I broke it up into two videos because I wanted to give the legislation a particular focus. Part one showed how major companies are complaining that organized crime theft is one of the biggest problems that they're facing right now in terms of them making a profit and increasing their revenue. So the problem was so bad that they wrote to Congress. So it was like 20 major companies that wrote to Congress saying that they need to do something. So whenever you have this thing where you have companies and government coming together for something that they feeling is an issue, it almost never is a good thing for the consumer and the average person. In this video, we're gonna show that. So this video, we're gonna go over a particular act. It's the Informed Consumer Act. And this act right here, being sponsored by Republicans and Democrats, it's bipartisan, pushed by both, and it's being heavily pushed by companies for government to do something. Is something that you don't see on TV. Like you see all over the media, you see these images of hordes of people and these so-called organized crime rings smashing and grabbing, breaking windows and taking all of these items from these stores. You see that constantly. This is something that's nationwide. But what you don't hear about and you don't see is what's being done about it and the solution that's being done about it between government and these companies, really showing that this whole notion that smash and grabs are a national crisis is a smokescreen. Because once we get through this legislation that they're attempting to pass, you're going to see that all of this is about attacking the online retailer. See, there's a rise of people making money online. And anytime you're making money and you're bypassing things like taxes and you're taking the power and destiny in your own hands, there's always a concerted effort of major companies and government to thwart that because they want what you make. They want a piece of your pie. So this propaganda that you see in the media of hordes of people is happening, right? But is it really a national crisis like they're saying? Because like I covered in the first video, there's no data to support what these companies are saying that these thefts are a big issue. This thing could be overblown. But all of the newspapers, all of the major outlets, all they're pumping is that this is a national issue. So before we get into the what it possibly really is, let's get into this letter that was written to Congress by these retailers late last year. So this right here I'm reading is from the Retail Industry Leaders Association website, and this letter was written, or the header is December 9th, 2021. This is to the Honorable Nancy Pelosi, Speaker, the Honorable Kevin McCarthy, Minority Leader of the United States House of Representatives, Honorable Chuck Schumer. These people aren't honorable, but I'm only reading honorable for formalities, but they're dishonorable. Majority Leader, United States, and the Honorable Mitch McConnell, Minority Leader. Really, you're not supposed to have titles of nobility. Anytime, I know this is a deviation, but anytime you see titles next to a public official, that's really a violation of the original 13th Amendment. Because the original 13th Amendment wasn't about slavery. It was eliminating what's called titles of nobility, because America was breaking away from England, and England had these things. They had these attorneys and lawyers and esquires. So when America broke away from them, they made the founding fathers made it against the common law, the national law, for anybody to have these titles, because that was something that they did in England. So Esquire, Honorable, and things of that nature that judges have and lawyers have, that's really a violation of the Constitution. But ironically, even though this bill was ratified That amendment, that original 13th Amendment, wasn't the one that was passed. Hence, we got the one that's passed now, that allows slavery under imprisonment for so-called freed slaves. But that's a deviation. So with that, let's read this letter. Dear Speaker Pelosi, Leader Schumer, Leader McConnell, and Leader McCarthy, leading retailers are concerned about the growing impact organized retail crime is having on the communities we proudly serve, which is why we strongly support the bipartisan and bicameral integrity, notification, and fairness in online retail marketplaces for Consumers Act. This important legislation will modernize our consumer protection laws to safeguard families and communities from the sale of illicit products, and we urge its quick passage. As millions of Americans have undoubtedly seen on the news in recent weeks and months, retail establishments of all kinds have seen a significant uptick in organized crime in communities across the nation. While we constantly invest in people, policies, and innovative technology to deter theft, criminals are capitalizing on the anonymity of the internet and the failure of certain marketplaces to verify their sellers. This trend has made retail businesses a target for increasing theft, hurt legitimate businesses who are forced to compete against unscrupulous sellers, and has greatly increased consumer exposure to unsafe and dangerous counterfeit products. There is no simple answer to stopping organized retail crime or the sale of counterfeits, but key to stemming the tide of these growing problems is transparency. If a customer buys a product from a local retail storefront or commerce site and it is broken or otherwise defective, the consumer knows exactly who to contact. There is accountability. In the current environment, criminal networks and unscrupulous businesses have exploited a system that protects their anonymity to sell unsafe, stolen, or counterfeit products with little legal recourse. This lack of transparency on particular third-party marketplaces has allowed criminal activity to fester. Now, this is the bill that we're going to cover in this video. It's called the Informed Consumers Act. It's a simple bipartisan measure that will increase transparency online for all marketplaces, making it easier for consumers to identify exactly who they are buying from and make it harder for criminal elements to hide behind fake screen names and false business information to fence illicit products while evading law enforcement. The legislation has unified retailers, consumer groups, manufacturers, law enforcement, and all those serious about stopping the sale of counterfeit and stolen goods sold online. It is time for Congress to modernize our consumer safety laws so consumers, retail employees, and businesses are not targets of organized retail crime and dangerous counterfeit products. Implementing basic transparency and verification protocols is essential and will finally expose criminals who are selling consumers stolen, fake, and dangerous products. We appreciate your support and timely action on this needed legislation. We look forward to working with you and your staff to help protect communities, families, and consumers. Sincerely. So these are the companies that wrote this letter. Academy Sports, Best Buy, Dick's Sporting Goods, Foot Locker, the Kroger, Major Inc., Nordstrom, Rite Aid, Target, VF Corporation, Retail Industry Leaders Association, AutoZone, CVS Health, Dollar General Corporation, The Home Depot, Levi Strauss, Neiman Marcus, Petco Animal Supplies, Southeastern Grocers, Ulta Beauty, and Walgreens Boots Alliance. So those 20 companies wrote a letter to Congress begging them to do something about crime. And as you see in the letter, that solution included most surveillance. But it's mostly online. So here's my question. If there's smash and grabs at physical locations in these stores, why is this bill targeting online sellers? It's a disconnect. You're stealing from physical locations, right? But this bill is targeting online sellers. So there's something else going on. This has nothing to do with what they're stealing in these stores. This has something to do with the fact that this is another attempt to crack down on counterfeiters. It's another attempt to crack down on individuals that have enough gumption to make a living online. Because you have Amazon sellers, you have eBay that's always been providing income for individuals and small businesses. You have the rise of the sneaker craze, which sneakers are selling at ridiculous amounts, and that's global, right? All of these things are on the rise right now, but it's tax free, it's not highly regulated, and it has a lot of freedom and autonomy for the individual to conduct business, right? If this law passes, which I'm going to read, a lot of that's going to be cut down because the amount of restrictions and requirements that this legislation it requires is going to make it very difficult for high volume sellers to make a profit and make a living, especially do it without giving up everything in terms of their identity. So I'm going to read this bill. I'm going to read it because it's under two different official titles. The first one is S.936-Informed Consumers Act, the 117th Congress, 2021 to 2022. Now, the formal name of this bill, before I read this bill, I want to give a theory too, that it could possibly be that these companies are actually sponsoring these so-called criminals to break into their stores. That's something that came to mind that is quite possible. I don't have evidence for that. However, I want to direct people to a lady named Catherine Austin Fitz. And she talked about how in the riots with the George Floyd, and anytime you see these riots and you see people breaking into these stores, she was saying that if you look at all of the stores that the so-called protesters and so-called rioters broke into, basically it was orchestrated because they all are what I think she called it mortgage zones. And all of the stores, only the stores that were broken into that you've seen on TV, they were basically giving them the green light to break into these stores because they were either going to tear the buildings down and rebuild them, or they were already insured, basically prepared for this to happen so they can pull money out after these looters broke into these stores. So there was a zone in which she mapped out to show these stores being broken into and how they all were able to, I guess, refinance or something of that nature after they were broken into. So if that was done with the rioters, right, it wouldn't, and I've been in real estate for over 20 years, right? In New York, been doing real estate for almost 10 years. And I've done real estate in every part of Brooklyn, New York, Manhattan, Queens. And what I have noticed is that there's a particular group of individuals. YouTube algorithm, I can't say the ethnic group. But they are the largest. There's more of this ethnic group in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, where I'm from and where I live, than anywhere outside Israel. So what I notice is that this particular group has a habit, from my experience, of if their tenants didn't want to move because the landlords wanted to raise the rent, mysteriously, these buildings would get burned down. Now, hopefully you could draw a conclusion of what I'm saying. You have tenants who are predominantly one particular ethnic group. You have landlords who are one particular ethnic groups who wants their tenants to move because the rent that they had, especially in New York, is protected and it's very cheap and way under market rent. Because these tenants didn't want to move and they turned down the money that these landlords were offering them, mysteriously, these apartment buildings would be burned down. Now, between what I said about these rioters looting these stores, which were targeted in these mortgage zones, which they qualified, I believe, for refinancing, between the example I gave in real estate here in New York, I would not be surprised if these companies are sponsoring criminals to break into these establishments for the purpose of creating a narrative which will lead to government passing this legislation, which will lead to more surveillance and make it extremely difficult for individuals and small businesses to sell online without completely giving up their identity, their privacy in terms of bank accounts, and everything that makes online entrepreneurship appealing. That's just my theory. Don't have evidence for it, but trust and believe. If it does come to me, the video is coming. So I just wanted to say that before I read the bill. Now, here's the bill. It's called the Integrity, Notification, and Fairness in Online Retail Marketplaces for Consumers Act, or the Informed Consumers Act. This bill requires online marketplaces to collect, verify, and disclose certain information from high-volume third-party sellers. High-volume third-party sellers include online marketplace participants that conduct 200 or more transactions, resulting in total revenues of $5,000 or more during a continuous 12-month period. Online marketplaces must acquire these sellers' bank account numbers, government issue identification, tax identification numbers, and contact information. Online marketplaces must verify this information and annually certify any changes to it. That's crazy. Further, online marketplaces must make certain information, e.g. sellers' names and contact information, available to consumers through the seller's product listing, and provide consumers with methods to report electronically and by telephone any suspicious activities on the marketplace. The bill provides the Federal Trade Commission with the authority to enforce these requirements. That's ludicrous. So this isn't about smash and grabs, because if it's about the smash and grabs, then it would be only a crackdown on thievery in physical store locations. This entire bill is about online. That's suspect. So that's something to look at. So I implore everybody to go look at this Inform Act. And if you're an online business seller, take the action you need to take. People talk about voting, right? Is the way to go. People talk all that stuff about that. So now is the time to see just how much your vote counts. Your local congressman and all that, people that believe in that system of voting, then this is the time to see if that's legitimate. Other than that, I suggest that you get your stuff in order. If you deal with crypto, structure your business to true cryptos that are very, very private, like Monero, Zcash, or cryptos that are starting to come out or that's been out that are highly private. I would suggest that you get into that. I suggest that you get your affairs in order and pay attention to this bill. Go to congress.gov, get an alert on this bill, and prepare yourself, because this is what the Biden regime and this is what this scamdemic is now bringing us into. It's bringing us into increased surveillance. So I want to read it one more time, but this one is from a different name. I believe it passed the House, if I'm not mistaken. It's also called HR 5502, to require online marketplaces to verify certain information regarding high-volume third-party sellers of consumer products on such online marketplaces. The sponsor of this was Representative Schakowsky. Okay? And the bill requires online marketplaces, e.g. Amazon, to collect and certify certain contact and financial information from third-party sellers whose transactions and related revenues exceed specific thresholds. So I'm going to put these links in the description. Also, I'm going to timestamp the video because some of you might not have time to watch the whole video, or you might just want to know what the bullet points are of the video and not necessarily watch the whole video. So I'm going to timestamp the video. Also, subscribe. Your subscribes and you subscribing allows me to bring more content and actually start adding things to the videos. So with that, thank you. Be diligent. Pay attention. Don't let the media watch you. You watch it. And don't believe the mainstream narrative. Read between the lines and do your own due diligence. Peace.